and have lunch together. Look for signs of depression and encourage your coworkers to seek help. You can make returning to work easy for new parents by helping with their workload, or start a parent support group. As a mentor, you can volunteer to work with young people, sign up to read to or tutor students. Parenting is hard. Support helps parents and children, even in the best of situations. Support community programs that provide safe and healthy conditions for all families. Healthy childhoods, supportive relationships, and resilient communities start now with your help. What will you do? Everyone can raise awareness about community solutions that provide safe and healthy conditions for all children and families. Learn more about preventing adverse childhood experiences.
Okay, so now we're moving on to our panel. So just as a brief introduction, first on the left we have Dr. Tanya Galvan. She is a Latina clinical psychologist, child psychologist. She got her doctorate in a clinical child psychology at the University of Denver and did her pre-doctoral internship at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Most recently, she completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the Medical University of South Carolina. She is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at UGA, where she directs the Fuerte Lab. Her professional interests lie in promoting the mental health of Latinx youth and families. Next, we have Ms. Jory Moore. She is currently the 3rd and 5th grade school counselor at Gaines Elementary. She is in her 3rd year as a school counselor. Ms. Moore's background in public and mental health drives her core belief that prevention and education are key in supporting youth's mental health. Currently at Gaines, Ms. Moore provides individual counseling, small group counseling, and classroom lessons for 3rd to 5th grade homerooms. She serves as a coach for Gaines Girls on the Run, which is a running club, kickball teammate, safety patrol leader, and as a member of many school-based committees. Her life motto is, "Why fit in when you were born to stand out?" and tries to support everyone in being their authentic selves. Next, we have Ms. Shannon Milan. Shannon received her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from the University of Alabama. She did her internship in Athens, Georgia, and has continued her career here in the Classic City. Shannon has worked primarily with elementary school-aged clients, including providing counseling services in a local elementary school. She has worked in a variety of settings, ranging from an intensive residential program to a local counseling practice. She incorporates creativity, play, and art into her therapy techniques in her work with children to help them increase their skills to work through their current issues. Shannon takes a client-centered, solution-focused approach where she collaborates with her clients to increase their coping skills. And lastly, we have Dr. Monica Williams. Dr. Williams is a licensed psychologist with nearly 10 years of clinical practice. As a Georgia native, her academic credentials are all from Georgia public universities. She earned her BA in mass communication and her MED in guidance and counseling from the University of West Georgia. She completed her PhD in counseling psychology at the University of Georgia, and she completed an APA accredited doctoral internship at Texas A&M University. Dr. Williams' clinical work focuses on late adolescence and early to middle adulthood. With the majority of her career being in a university setting, she has worked with a wide variety of presenting concerns, including but not limited to depression, anxiety, family of origin issues, including divorce, grief, and loss, life transitions, career shifts and exploration, self-esteem, and diversity concerns such as race-based trauma and LGBTQ+ concerns. Her areas of interest include wellness, African American well-being, identity development, grief and loss, managing chronic health conditions, the integration of spirituality and religion into mental health practice, depression, diversity, and inclusion. As a clinical assistant professor, Dr. Williams focuses on educating students on the ethical and culturally humble practice of counseling and psychology. She teaches across the professional counseling master's and counseling psychology doctoral programs. I want to welcome these amazing panelists.
Awesome. Well, I'm Mary Catherine Hawks, and I'm going to be moderating the panel, so give me a moment to walk over to my questions. And I just want to, again, thank our panelists and let y'all know that one of our panelists is not here. So if you saw her face up there, she was sick tonight. So if you were also looking for her today, we wanted to just let you know that Jacqueline Adams couldn't make it today. So thank you again to our panelists, and we'll go ahead and jump right into some of our pre-prepared questions. And these questions were developed based on some of the questions that have been coming up in our day-to-day work, and also some questions that some of the leadership and staff around the district have come up with. So we'll start with those questions, and then we'll jump into some of the ones that are submitted by all of the different mechanisms. And this is the QR code if you're wanting to submit one through our Google form. All right, so the first question we have is going to be about just really one of the reasons why we're here today is that just last year, the Surgeon General released a 53-page report warning of a youth mental health crisis. Could you all discuss the factors that may be contributing to this? And I'm going to start with Shannon for this question.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you for joining us online if you're online. There are a lot of reasons. As with every question on here, there's a lot of different answers. One of the first things I notice with the kids I see is it's no longer to be like okay or the middle of the road. You have to be the best or the top 10 or top 5 or, you know, you have to be that top of that class, or even in sports, you can't just be like good at soccer. You have to be like, I'm going to play in the MLS. So that's putting a lot more pressure on kids, which is kind of overflowing their cups with so much anxiety. I see a lot of anxiety that is bringing them into counseling, whereas back in the day, we didn't have as much pressure to be the best and be top of the class, so we might not have crossed that line into clinical need versus something that our parents could handle at home. Another reason is social media. Kids either don't know, or it's very hard even as an adult to keep in mind that social media, what you see on there is a very curated version of that person. Even the, woohoo, I'm doing this randomly, oh, I'm doing this live stream randomly, is very deliberate. So it's very hard for kids especially to kind of disassociate the perfectness of that social media platform and what that person's real life is about. Poverty has increased a lot of mental health needs. It's really hard to focus on your mental health. It's hard to focus on school when you are worried about when your next meal is going to come. It's also hard to get the strategies you need, coping strategies you need at home when your caretaker, when your guardian is having to work more and can't spend that long quality time with you. The pandemic didn't help anything, as most of us know here. And then if anybody else has any.
So something that I see, especially being in an elementary school, going off of a lot of what was just shared, was that with social media and phones in general, it's hard for kids to disconnect from maybe the people that they perceive to be bullying them at school or the drama that goes on at school, because it just follows them. Because yes, you can turn off your phone, but you also don't want to miss out talking to your friends. So you're still getting those messages from the other kids, and that negative voice starts coming in your head, along with that curated image, comparing yourselves to, well, I'm not at that level, how do I get to that level, and then putting more pressure on yourself. I also see that adults are struggling too. That's something that's coming up a lot this year, is not only are we doing referrals for our kids, we're doing referrals for adults. especially when it comes to the pandemic, losing people close to you, the adult support systems, and then things being so up in the air. A lot of times then that leaves a kid feeling like maybe they can't go talk to their parent because they are so busy or because they're dealing with their own things. And so I think it's also important to keep that in mind, is that how, as adults, how our mental health is then affecting our kids.
Thank you so much, Ms. Milan and Ms. Moore. That was a great lead-in to our next question, which is, if a family is looking for support for either themselves as adults or children, where's a good place to start? And we'll start with Dr. Williams for this one.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you guys for coming out, even if you're online. So I think that Shannon and I are going to tag team this one. And so my response is really about services that are available right here in this community that you might not know about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just tell you tonight, but I will provide this list to the ladies that put this presentation together so that if you want them, you'll have them later. But one is there are a wealth of services that are available to you through the Mary Frances Early College of Education that you might not know about. So there is the Center for Counseling and Personal Evaluation that provides mental health services to individuals on a sliding fee. There is also the Aspire Clinic, which isn't in the College of Education, but that is the McFall Center on campus that provides therapy as well as they do mental health therapy, they do financial counseling, they do nutrition counseling, a lot of great resources there. There's also the Vision and Hearing Clinic that is in the College of Education. Some other things that are outside of the university. Oh, and then there's the school psychology clinic. So if you have concerns about your student maybe exhibiting some symptoms of a learning disability or things of that nature, you can go get them tested there at a lower cost. And then there are several community agencies or private practices in Athens that would be very helpful for you to know about. One is La Clinica, which is a mental health clinic in Athens that provides bilingual and bicultural counseling for the Latinx community at no charge, okay? And then there's the Athens Black Therapist Collective, which is a group of licensed mental health providers that identify as African American that are here to provide support for families that identify as African American. I have a lot more. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand it over to Shannon.
If your child is in school and you have time, you can schedule a meeting with the school counselor, and they can act as a triage and see, okay, this is a community partner that I know that works really well with this presenting issue. If you don't have time for a meeting like that, you can go to Psychology Today. You can just Google Psychology Today and it should pop up. With that, you can search by ages seen, price, whether they take a certain insurance, if they offer a sliding scale. You can just, it's a really great tool. Or you can just Google, therapist in Athens or child therapist in Athens, and just call, leave voicemails, email. If you do get an appointment, but it's a long wait, you can call back and see if they've had a cancellation and can get you in faster, get on every wait list, and then, if you get in with one person and another, the other therapist calls you back, you can always, therapists don't take it to heart when you're like, oh, we're seeing another therapist, they got us in sooner. We're so happy you got in sooner. So just call, email. You kind of have to be that squeaky wheel sometimes.
And I'm going to go ahead and give Dr. Galvin and Ms. Moore a chance to add anything to that, since it's such a broad question.
I will say the other thing is that one of the benefits of the pandemic is that it's opened our doors to telehealth. And so if providers in Athens are full and there's really extensive wait lists, try Atlanta. See if anybody is offering telehealth services. I know there's pros and cons to telehealth, but sometimes you may be able to access those resources as well. So even expanding outside of Athens may be a really great place to get into mental health services as well.
And then coming from the school's point of view, it's great if parents can come in or guardians can come in to talk with the school counselor, but sometimes it's as simple as a phone call. Usually we are most likely seeing a lot of the behaviors at school also just because of how much time kids spend there every week, every day. So a lot of times as a school counselor, I will reach out to families just to offer the referral. And most of the time we just need insurance information and you're presenting concerns. So it's great for you to come in, but also a phone call or an email is just as good, especially because we know parents are so busy.
Thank y'all all for all those valuable answers. And I'll also use this opportunity to direct y'all. There's a resource table that also has just a one-page flyer that talks about many of the suggestions they gave and some additional just tips that we've created. And it has Psychology Today on there as well. And there's some other resources that we'll probably get to throughout. And so I appreciate all those tips, and we'll move on to the next question. This one's a little bit longer. And this one is just that we hear often that caregivers can have difficulty recognizing the difference between what may be a developmentally appropriate versus those that may be requiring additional support in a student's behavior. And what suggestions do you all have for any caregivers who might experience this and want some guidance? And we'll start for this one with Shannon.
Okay, so if a behavior is starting to impact the child, the family, both the child and the family, multiple times a week or every day, and is impeding that child in their daily lives, so that could be their at home, at school, with their family, with their friends, then it has crossed into something that needs additional support. So for example, like a child is having an outburst 2 times a week, that is making it impossible for them to do their homework, so that's impeding their grades. Their grades are going down because they're having these outbursts. That's something that needs to be addressed with a school counselor or a counselor in the field.
Thank you, Ms. Milan. Does anybody else, just one of y'all, maybe want to add anything to what Ms. Milan shared? Okay. All right, so for our 4th question today is to ask you all if you can discuss some of the alternatives to the traditional one-on-one counseling or therapy that has proven beneficial for children and adolescents. So some alternatives to that one-on-one counseling. And we'll start with Dr. Williams for this question.
Well, family therapy can always be beneficial to students, to children. But if we want to think about things that would help with maybe less complex, what we would call like subclinical experiences of depression and anxiety, I think that things such as getting them involved, so team sports or clubs and organizations like 4-H can be very helpful, scouting, trio programs if they're old enough to join, so that would be more of your middle and high school students. And then getting them involved in activities like art or music, collecting items, things of that nature can help expand their experiences. It can give them additional mentors that can provide guidance and support for them. That can be very helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. So we'll go ahead and go on to question number 5. How can caregivers collaborate with our schools to ensure that their students get the mental health support that they need? And we'll start with Ms. Moore for this one.
So, of course, I'm biased because I'm a school counselor, but I always say, go to your school counselor, no matter what school you're at, even at the high school level. If you think the school counselors are just there for college, that's not true. School counselors are the mental health experts in the school building. So it is always good to go to us because we at least have resources to give you. A lot of times, you can talk with us and we can help at least connect you to getting support that the students might need in school. So if a student has diagnosed ADHD in school, there are plans that we can help get them that will follow them throughout their schooling so that they continue to receive those services as they go along. And one of the most important things to me is just being open. Of course, you don't have to tell every bit of hardship that your family has been to, but it's important to be honest that maybe your student does need some help regulating their emotions. Maybe they do have outbursts and they need a break. If we know that before, we try to be trauma informed so that we adjust our reactions, the discipline that students need, so that we are serving them at the level that they need. And then I also think that it is important that you talk with your students. As I mentioned before, unfortunately, a lot of students feel like, oh, my parents are too busy. They don't want to hear what I have to say. And this kind of goes back to that traditional one-on-one counseling. An alternative to it is sitting down and talking with your child at home. So maybe that's something that your family feels like you don't really have time for. Invite them to help out around the house so that you can hear what's going on with them at school and their personal lives, and so they're also not holding it in. Because as I tell kids all the time, when we hold in our emotions, it's like when you shake up a soda bottle, because eventually it's gonna explode. So we have to get it out somehow.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Anybody else want to add anything to that question? Okay, so we'll move on to our next question. If I click the right button. So what are some of the strategies that caregivers can use at home to help regulate their students' emotions at home? And just to add to what Ms. Moore just said, since she did share, listening, but in addition to that, some things that might help get regulated. And we'll start with Shannon for this question.
So I am seconding, talk openly and honestly at an age-appropriate level with your kids. Your kids might see you as this person who has it all together, and if you mention like, oh, I had bad anxiety when I was a kid, they could feel seen. Check in with your kid every day, whether it's at dinner or before bed. You can do like a highs and lows of the day where they say a high of the day and a low of the day. Another thing is, is show them how you use your coping skills. So when you're feeling sad or mad or anxious, show them an example of, okay, when I'm feeling mad, this is what I do. I go and I, scribble on a piece of paper or something. You can read books that have a main character that is going through similar circumstances. Ish is a great book for perfectionism. I just don't like the sound of no. Many people can relate to that. There's The Invisible String is a fantastic book about any kind of loss or separation. You can also, if the child is already in therapy and you're still looking for more things to do at home, you can collaborate with the therapist, like, oh, okay, what do I need to do at home? Like, what's their homework? Can I help them practice implementing those coping skills and those changes that they're learning about and working on in therapy? There's also a activity you can do with your kids. This is great for kids or adults who aren't able to verbalize what they're feeling as well as, some people are big talkers. Some people can't really talk about things. For those of you online, for those of you here, if you can see it, they're passing some out. It's called the Feelings Heart, and you can do this without the piece of paper. Just draw a heart and have the child color in the heart with how they feel. So one color could be, happiness is red, and if they're feeling super happy, they color most of the heart happy. Maybe they're feeling a little sad and they want to make sad green, then they do a little sliver of sad. And that's one way for them to be able to see visually how they're feeling, and for you to kind of keep an eye, keep a check on those feelings that you might be seeing pop up in something like anxiety, as like they're getting a stomach ache, or they're lashing out and having outbursts. Might be some anger or anxiety and sadness, and it's a great way for them to see, oh, there's more than one feeling going on here. Let's kind of separate them out and see, I know I use this coping skill for anger and this coping skill for sadness, so maybe I need to do this one because my heart's more red than blue or something like that.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Milan. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to that question? Any other strategies?
I think the only thing I would add to that is to make sure that you're practicing coping skills outside of a moment of needing coping skills that gets them in the habit and familiar with the coping skill prior to the moment of, now I need it. It's a lot harder to implement those skills and strategies in that moment, that red hot moment, than it is to already be familiar with them and then be able to implement them when you actually do need them.
Thank you, Dr. Galvin. And this is another time where there are some one-pagers about strategies for enhancing well-being and some grounding exercises on the table if you'd like to take one home with you. And for those online, we'll post those on social media so you can have access. So for the next question, it's going to be around, is there a stigma around mental health, specifically among Black and brown communities? And if so, could you address some of the factors that contribute to this? Are there ways to address these factors to reduce or eliminate this stigma? And we're going to start with Dr. Williams for this question.
So what do you guys think? Is there a stigma around mental health for Black and brown folks? I see some people nodding yes. Do you want to talk? You don't have to.
We don't have to put anybody on the spot, yeah. If anybody wants.
So it sounds like people think, yes, there is, and that's true. I think throughout my time frame working in mental health, we are seeing a shift. We're seeing members of the community be more open and receptive to it, recognizing that we need to challenge that stigma, but it's deeply rooted, and it's there for a reason. It's a valid stigma. So a lot of the foundation of the stigma starts with just a general mistrust of the medical community. And if you look back historically, especially within the United States, there have been so many times where Black and brown people have been used for medical research in horrific ways. And I mean, the most famous one, I think, is the Tuskegee experiment, but there are several others. If you watch the Henrietta Lacks movie, that's another example. But even with the father of modern gynecology, he experimented on slaves without, they were slaves. They can't give permission. They weren't giving him permission to do that, and it was oftentimes without anesthesia. And so that history is complex, it's ugly, it's dark, and people don't forget, right? So your great-grandmother didn't go to the doctor because they didn't trust this system, and it just goes on and on and on. And then there are also the just general stressors of living within systemic racism. And so recognizing that these systems of oppression and kind of diminishing our value impact the way we show up in the world. One other point I'll make about the history, and then I'll get off the history, is it's not just medical, it's just not the medical profession that mistreated Black and brown communities. So within psychology, there was a lot of that as well. There were disorders that were created, like drapetomania, which was the unrelenting pursuit for Black people to attempt to free themselves from their slave owners. That was a mental disorder. So when you take all of that in, it can be hard for Black and brown people to trust medical professionals. But then there's some other things that go into that as well. And this concept that if I have a mental illness, that means that I'm weak or I'm not strong, I can't handle my own issues. The other thing is this, you don't have enough faith, like you should just believe in God or go to God for this issue. All of those things combined can make it shameful for a person to say that I'm experiencing depression or anxiety or other types of mental health challenges like hearing voices and things of that nature. And that's kind of where all of that comes from. And so the way that I think, some of the ways that I think that we can reduce that stigma, one is to talk about it, right? Talk about it in our own communities first, right? We have to create a safe space. We have to let them know that it's okay. And being careful about, like, when you bring up that topic and someone, your family, friend, whoever in your community is starting to open up and share with you, then we have to be careful not to minimize or diminish what they're saying. So very simple comments that we think are helpful can actually diminish and shut down that ability to help and reinforce the stigma. Things like, oh, you're gonna be okay, or just pray about it, or go to church. Like, then we're reinforcing, right? Like, you're weak, you didn't pray enough, and things of that nature. So being open, creating the opportunity to have the conversation, and then being able to refer them to people that can help. So you don't have to help them, because it can be hard to listen to pain, right? That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to say, maybe this person could help you. And so that's when the resources come into play. The other thing that you can do is invite mental health professionals to speak in your organizations and in your spaces. So inviting mental health professionals to your churches, to your social clubs, things of that nature, helping them understand, like, oh, here's a face. So it's not this random therapist, it's somebody that we can talk to and we know now. And the other thing I'll say is be open about your own experiences with mental health professionals, right? So your friends might be afraid to go, but if you say, well, I went and I had 3 sessions and it was lovely and I feel so much better, that kind of demystifies the process and destigmatizes that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. I'm going to see if anybody else wants to add anything to her response.
I think the only other thing I would add is that if you try a therapist and it doesn't feel like a good fit, keep shopping around. Just because it's not a good fit doesn't mean that therapy doesn't work for you or that it's not worthwhile. It just means that it wasn't a good fit, and it's okay to find another therapist. The last point I will make too is that seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of courage. There's a lot of strength and courage in recognizing when you might need help or when your child might need help. And so for anyone who needs to hear that, recognizing that you need some support is not a sign of weakness, I'm here to tell you that that is the case. There is nothing wrong with asking for help.
Thank you, Dr. Galvin. So moving on to our next question, could you discuss mental health disparities that exist for our Latinx communities? And what are some of the ways you believe would help to eliminate these disparities? And we'll start with Dr. Galvin.
Sure, sounds good. I will say that while I will be speaking to my experience and my knowledge with Latinx communities in particular, these disparities are not just specific to Latinx populations. They more broadly affect marginalized populations, including Black and Brown communities, LGBTQ. But what we do know about Latinx populations is that they do tend to have higher rates of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress, just kind of given everything that they experience. They also tend to have a harder time accessing services, either because of language barriers or what we call structural barriers, so lack of insurance or not knowing how to navigate a mental health system, because that in and of itself can be pretty challenging and you get the runaround. And so both of those things, so higher rates of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress, and more difficulties in getting mental health services is what actually creates those mental health disparities for the Latinx population. Again, not unique to Latinx populations, but it is one population that does experience disparities. That being said, what do we do about them? So at the most basic level, I think we got to go and start addressing some of the stigma and start getting information about mental health out into the community, not kind of keep it into this therapy kind of office where only when you see a therapist do you get some information about what anxiety, what depression, what trauma is. The second piece is we got to move away from this one-on-one counseling approach. There's just never going to be enough therapists to address all of the need. And so getting out into schools, getting out into primary care physicians and helping them get trained in identifying mental health supports, providing some of those brief interventions. Not everyone needs 20 therapy sessions. Some people will do okay with just one or two. So helping other professionals that interact with Latinx communities, interact with Latinx families, provide that mental health support is what's ultimately going to help address disparities. And lastly, at a really, 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 really broad level is some policy changes. We got to change how our health insurance system is structured so that people and Latinx families, but again, marginalized families in general, can respond to mental health needs in a timely manner.
Thank you so much, Dr. Galvin. Anything else y'all'd like to add? So for our next question, we want to see, I think I skipped one, just a second, there we go. Could you discuss the unique challenges around mental health faced by the LGBTQI+ community and families? And what are some ways that we can address these challenges? And we'll start with Dr. Williams on this question.
I think one of the things that, so when I was thinking about this question, I was really focusing on schools and the idea of kind of what are the challenges in schools. And I think it's about feeling safe, right? Feeling safe and not being in a hostile environment. And so one of the main things that I think a lot of LGBTQI+ individuals experience is just this barrage of microaggressions that people aren't really realizing that is going on, but you put those microaggressions on top of the active bullying, and it's such an unsafe environment for these students. And we really have to, one, work to make our schools safe for all students and reduce that hostility. And so some of the things that I think might help address those challenges is, one, just increasing our knowledge around what it means to identify as a gender or sexual minority, like just understanding. Like, I think ignorance oftentimes breeds those hostile environments, and just awareness and knowledge is going to be paramount. I think the other thing is making sure that our schools incorporate anti-harassment and anti-bullying policies, and encouraging an environment of respect within the school and at home. So schools are only one part of this problem. Like, we have to make sure that that concept of respect and the understanding that we want to respect all people no matter how they show up. Like, as humans, we have a right to live and thrive. And so the schools can implement these policies, but they have to translate to the home as well. Let's see. And the simple way that that translates is, do my words and actions help to make others feel safe? It's just that simple. And if the answer is no, then we need to reevaluate what we're saying and how we're showing up and what we're doing, right? That's the foundation. Am I helping to make others feel safe?
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. And for our final question that is pre-prepared today, and then we'll move on to the section for y'all's questions, is going to be, what suggestions do you all have for the caregivers in marginalized communities in advocating for the mental health needs supports of their students? I know some valuable information's already been shared, but we'll start with Dr. Galvin to add to that.
Sounds great. So the first thing I would say is that while it may feel intimidating to ask for supports, you deserve those supports just as much. You and your child deserve those supports just as much as everyone. So it's okay to be persistent. Of course, working within the framework, right? So some things may not be possible, and that's okay. But then there could be alternatives that would help. So being persistent and continuing to advocate for yourself are probably the two biggest pieces of advice that I would give to caregivers seeking additional supports in schools. I know you also had a lot to contribute, so I do want to make sure that you have some say.
So something important, of course, is to understand what exactly the need of your student is. Oftentimes, not oftentimes, but a lot of times there are things that are actually environmental issues that are causing those stressors to appear in our students' lives. So they might seem to have anxiety going into the lunchroom, but maybe that's actually tied to not being able to access resources. So not knowing where their next meal is coming from and feeling very protective over that. And so I think it's also important that advocating for the support of your students means maybe reaching out to your school is a great resource, but also other local agencies for resources on maybe you do need extra support with meals, maybe you need help paying your bills so that you can maybe go have some fun with your kids, right? Because it's also still important to have leisure and fun. And yes, it's really important to talk to them about their mental health, but also remembering that they are still kids and they still want to have fun. So talk about fun things, be goofy. I like to end my one-on-one counseling sessions with something as simple as, what's your favorite color? You know, just getting to know them better. And then also just keep reaching out for help, right? Because unfortunately, there are some times where we'll face those structural barriers where we can't get through into some systems, but there is help out there for anyone who needs it. It's just knowing who to contact and where to go. So, of course, reach out to your local schools.
Thank you, Ms. Moore and Dr. Galvin. I'm making my way down to Karen, who has been monitoring all of our extra questions, and I'm going to pass it over to her now.
All right. Does anyone who is here joining us today have any questions? We also have note cards available for any anonymous questions. Yes, right here. Hang on just one second.
Hi, I'm Jessica Evans. I'm a student at the University of Georgia, and my question is, I know when we're looking at poverty, especially for the Black community, access to technology and resources is extremely low, especially getting in rooms like this, or even access to the live stream might be impossible for some people. So my question is, how can this information be given to those who can't get it? I know we can get it because we're here, but people that are not here right now, how can they get the information? And even for kids at schools, how can they get this information to their parents who might be hesitant? I know, I was gonna say this earlier, but we're talking about how the stigma for the Black community. I know even for me, like, my parents would be like, we need, just go to church, like, you know, come to church and like make sure you're praying more, and it would be like a anti-therapy thing, like, no, we're not paying for that, like, watch a sermon or something. So I know a lot of people are just hesitant, and so I guess what is being done to get the information to people that I literally can't get it, if that makes sense.
I will say one of the things that I know my awesome research assistants are working with, one of which is here, is we're creating infographics with basic information about what we call psychoeducation, so like just mental health information. What is it? How do you recognize signs of it? Where do you go for help? What is like the prognosis if you do have this concern, and getting that out into the community as much as possible to where kids are already and families are already interacting. So whether that's rec centers, primary care physicians, just treating them essentially like brochures and flyers, but just knowledge. That's one thing that we're trying to do at my lab.
And I would also add, because as mentioned in my bio, my background is in health promotion, which is in the College of Public Health. And something that's really important is, as mental health practitioners, is making sure we're also putting things in languages that our community understands. Unfortunately, not everyone has a higher education, so we need to make sure that we are being approachable with our information. So not just using, like, you know, diagnostic terms kind of things, but saying, like, what to do when you're feeling sad, and just calling it a basic emotion word that everyone understands, making sure you're including pictures, and also making sure that it is translated into languages so people outside of whatever majority community that you believe is there can also receive that information in a way that they can understand.
I really appreciate your question, and I don't have a full answer, so I'll acknowledge that now. But I think, one, again, getting out into the community, so going to the churches, going to the places where they are, right, and talking to them. The other thing is there are resources that can cover the cost for mental health services for, I'm thinking in particular, Black women. So there's Black Girls Smiles. It's a organization that will provide funding for African American women. They have to apply, but then they can get funding for therapy. And there's also the Loveland Foundation. So those are two foundations that will provide financial resources to African American women who want to engage in therapy but maybe don't have insurance or are underinsured and can't. So those are some options that I thought you might want to know about.
Another great resource here, local here in Athens, is Athens Parent Wellbeing, and they provide scholarships for therapy, doulas, they offer peer support. So Athens Parent Wellbeing would be a great, and they have a whole list of therapists that work with them and offer therapy at a lower rate than even their sliding scale sometime. And they just, Monera is the one in charge, and she's amazing. So if you're looking for a resource there.
Thank you all very much. And just a couple of plugs also related to your question for what some of the things going on in the school district. Our wonderful Department of Family and Community Engagement with our family engagement specialists that we now have in every school, right? Is that right? Yes. So they, among many of their responsibilities, one of them is getting information to families that might not be able to get it through traditional routes. So they're wonderful, doing great work. And then also the opening of our two clinics, community health clinics. Hillsman Middle's been open for a while, and the new Clark Middle clinic just opened that serves Clark Middle and Alps now, soon to expand, but they also have mental health services available there as well. So just another way to try to remove some of the barriers to access that have existed. Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Jenny Parrish. I'm also a student at the University of Georgia. So one thing that's been, a problem across the nation is like these staffing shortages, where schools are either having to leave positions completely vacant or hire underqualified teachers, both for like long-term positions and even substitutes. And so my question is, how do you think that relates to the youth mental health crisis, especially because I know that y'all talked about like teachers being able to look out for students and, hiring more counselors. And I was just wondering if, y'all have seen that in your own personal experiences and maybe like anything that you think schools should do, I guess.
So being in schools, and especially starting in the middle of the pandemic, I have definitely noticed that we're losing staff members, we don't have the same support, because our staff are also burnt out, because we are still, humans. So unfortunately what happens then is when you don't have enough support staff or enough teachers, or you're putting so many more responsibilities on homeroom teachers and stuff, they start getting burnt out too. And then sometimes, because we're still human, that trickles down to the kids, because they're not able to regulate their emotions as well. And so that's why it's really important to also, emphasize that staff needs to take care of themselves too, because we can't be there for kids if we're barely there for ourselves. It's the you can't pour from an empty cup kind of thing. So I definitely have seen that, and because people leaving for whatever reason, sometimes that means that student doesn't have their support person anymore. Unfortunately, there are some kids who they only have that one person in the building that they trust, and so when they leave, they kind of feel like they're just floundering, which is also why it's important to make sure that as, you know, staff members in the school, that we connect with like as many kids as we can, even if it's not someone that we see every day. It's just making sure that we're there to support them, because also that can give us energy and make us feel good, is to having that positive conversation with the kids.
I've seen a lot more kids who are presenting with anxiety, and it's taking longer for the school or the pediatrician or whoever it might be to recognize that persistent stomach ache isn't a medical thing, it's an anxiety symptom. So I'm seeing more of kind of a delay in services because, you know, the teachers that have been doing it for so long and are like, oh, okay, that's might be anxiety, just aren't there, or, you know, it's just a volunteer, which, you know, thank you for volunteering and everything, but they might not have the same training to recognize those symptoms.
Any other questions? Okay, I think that concludes our question and answer portion. And the last thing we have, right on time, these are just a list of resources. They're also available over here for anyone who would like to take them home, share with your friends. And anything else? Any closing remarks from our panelists today?
I, of course, being in a school, I think it's very important that for our community stakeholders, so parents, grandparents, students at UGA here in the community, to interact with your local schools also, because getting that extra support can make a huge difference. So like Clark County Mentor Program, great program, involves people from the community to come in. So maybe the students who don't get to see a counselor, at least they have that one person there to support them. So just want to put that out there. And they are always looking for more mentors.
Thank you. Okay, well, I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank everyone at home for watching. And most of all, I want to thank our wonderful panelists. So thank you very much. That being said, I hope everyone has a good night.